Hi there. While I was in field experience this semester, I was able to experience two different schools of two different ages. The first school that I visited was Monterey Elementary School in Grove City, and my co-op teacher was Mrs. Emily Chester. The second school that I had visited was Jackson Middle School, also in Grove City, and the co-op teacher was Mr. Nick Klein. Both of these schools are in the Southwestern City School District. As addressed before, both schools are placed in Grove City. This is a middle-class suburban area, so most students were relatively similar and the classes were not very diverse. However, there would be a few people here and there that might have a different cultural background or be of a different race or might be more or less well off financially than someone else in their classroom, but overall it would be pretty similar. When looking at the socioeconomic standpoint, the students in the Grove City schools are pretty similar when it comes to socioeconomic status. Students appear to be well-groomed and they wear clothes that are in good condition. However, this is not always the case in other schools around the district itself. The Southwestern City School District is actually quite diverse. I would like to start off by addressing classroom management in the two schools because both teachers were very different in their approach to management. In Gordon's article, there were 5 levels of discipline in the classroom. Level 1 being a very small or minor situation. Maybe the students are just poking each other's arm, or on the other end of the spectrum, it would be a level 5 situation, where the teacher may even just stop rehearsal and leave the room because the behavioral issue got to be so bad. I will start with Mrs. Chester. Mrs. Chester is in an elementary school, so of course her methods will already be different than that of Mr. Klein's. Issues that may have arose in Mrs. Chester's classroom were usually very minor, usually a 1 or a 2 level. Students would poke each other in the arm or would not sit on the floor in their chair, or there'd be talking during teacher instruction. These issues were simply addressed using phrases such as, "give me quiet mouths," or "sit on the floor crisscross applesauce." If there was a level 2 situation and the kids were just not listening to the instruction, she will tell the students, "I will wait," or she'll say, "give me 5," which was actually a building-wide concept used by all of the teachers, and it meant 5 different characteristics of respect. In the rare case of some rowdy days, she might stop the lesson briefly and explain to students why they need to listen and why they are learning and why they need to start listening. Then she will go right back into the lesson. But overall, the situation never really went beyond a 1 or a 2. At Jackson, however, the behavioral scale ranged from a 1 to a full 5. Most days range from a 1 to maybe a 3. This class is very rowdy, and it is very difficult for Mr. Klein to do much detailed instruction with his concert choir because they just won't stop the talking or the misbehavior. The other choir, symphonic choir, tends to be much more in order, and they are working with more detailed instruction such as phrase shaping and expressiveness of the music, whereas the concert choir is still just trying to get the notes under their belt. Here I will focus mostly on the concert choir because this is the ensemble that we saw most of the 3 choirs that they do have at the school. Before Mr. Klein even starts class, he puts on a headset microphone so that he does not have to strain his voice too much to talk over the students. When the students start talking too much, or if he gets working with another section, Mr. Klein might look over at the noisy section and tell them, "Shh, stop talking," or "why do I hear so much chatter?" And then if the students continue to be rowdy, he will stop for a moment and just stare at the noisy section until they are quiet, or he will say something like, "why do I still hear talking?" And this is a pretty typical day in Jackson Concert Choir rehearsal. However, there was one day that the behavior actually got really bad, and I wrote about this in my journal. This was a situation where a level 5 occurred. It started out as students talking and generally misbehaving, and then it kept building and building until the behavior actually spread to the other students. And when this happened, Mr. Klein ended rehearsal 20 minutes early and actually had the students sit there in total silence, and the students could not use their phones, they couldn't do their homework or anything. Basically, they were in what he calls lockdown. And so during this time, this 20-minute period, Mr. Klein would take the students that had started the misbehavior, the ones that were actually talking back to him and being really disrespectful, and he took them into his office and addressed them individually instead of taking out on the entire class. And I am not sure if I would have addressed this issue the same way, but I think that ending rehearsal early was a little much. But I do agree with the fact that it is important to address the students that are originally at fault and not take it out on all of the students and the ones that, and most importantly, were not misbehaving. So, unfortunately, in Mr. Klein's case, the misbehavior interferes with a lot of his lessons. He can't get a lot done. But however, luckily for Mrs. Chester, in her classroom, it's not too much of an issue, and she's able to do a lot of instruction. On the idea of behavioral issues in the classroom, I would like to address the Evertson article. This article discussed 2 ways that could be used to prevent some misbehavior in the room. The first is called with-itness, and the second is called overlapping. With-itness is when the teacher addresses the issue with the correct students that are causing the misbehavior before it spreads to the rest of the classroom. Overlapping is when the teacher needs to address 2 or more misbehaviors at once. Mrs. Chester was pretty good with both of these things. If there was a student having trouble behaving, she would physically have the student move to a different spot on the floor so they would not be disruptive. Mr. Klein, on the other hand, had a ton to deal with in his classroom. I think that he could have done some different things regarding with-itness. I didn't agree with everything that he did in that aspect. However, I did agree with a lot with what he did with overlapping. He was able to handle many different tasks at once, which is not an easy task. So, just to wrap up, overall, I learned a lot while I was at both of these schools. Although I was in a somewhat familiar environment, I learned that I needed to work on my own classroom management, and I definitely got a good lesson on it from both of these schools. And both teachers were wonderful musicians, they were wonderful educators, and I would be happy to work with both of them again in the future. Thanks for watching.